Stormgate, a New Orleans gay love story. The Klaxon on the pump floor coughed once and held a note, and the radio slid into the space like a hand on a railing. Andre, do not crack gate 4. Seiche on the lake is trending up. Hold the basin. I repeat, do not open the outfall. I had my palm on the cold wheel when he said it. I could feel the pressure of 17th Street Canal on the far side of steel, the basin swollen from 2 hours of hard bands, the lake a mouth I was not going to feed. I let my hand fall and told the wheel we'd both live to be friends. Copy, gate 4 stays closed, I answered, trying to sound like the calm in someone else's story. We'll pump it. This is Malik with NOHSEP, posted at pump station 6 until EOC rotates, the voice added, steady, precise, the right kind of south in it. Turbine 2 just coughed on the telemetry. Tell me you've got the diesels humming. He said, do not like a blessing. He said my name like a seatbelt. I could work with both. I'm Andre Landry, 32, Sewerage and Water Board pump operator at Station 6, Lakeview side of the canal. If the city's a bowl, we're the part that pretends we're a spoon. My nights are screens and sound and the way a bearing tells you a story if you stand close enough. I know which bar screen rake squeals at 76 inches of trash load, which swing check likes to lie about being seated, and which wall bolt you can tighten with 2 fingers when the torque wrench thinks you're being dramatic. When the band set up across Pontchartrain and push water into the bowl we live in, the city remembers a rule older than the first brass band. Low ground loses unless high hands help. On the floor below, Pump 3 breathed like an old man who knew the joke. Pump 5 gave back that tiny hiss that says air is out of the casing and water is where it belongs. Turbine 2, one of our finicky 25 Hz elders, had a hitch in its spin that made every hair on my arm try to become a barometer. Malik, I said, 2's hunting. I've got Diesel A and Diesel B warm. I'm going to bring A online and split load with 5. Affirmed, he said, and the syllables landed like sandbags. And Andre, thank you for not feeding the lake. The rain hit the side doors as if it had been dared. The telemetry board traced our day in light. Canal stage at 1.9 feet, rising. Lake wind piling from the Ian. Head loss through the outfall gates minor, but minor doesn't stay minor if you get clever. There's a reason do not is printed larger than if in our manual. I nudged Diesel A online and listened to the hushed argument between fuel and air settle into a truce. The synchronizer winked its little green eye. The watt meter climbed like a guest who knows you want them. The old hands teach you to narrate your own work because someday you'll need to hear yourself say you're doing it right. Asynchronized, I told nobody, and then told Malik because he was my nobody tonight. Splitting Pump 3 and Pump 5, we'll keep Canal shy of Crest. Copy, he said. I'm staging sand on Harrison and Canal Boulevard with Public Works. NOPD is closing underpasses as they pond. Do not let anyone talk you into opening Gate 4 to relieve pressure. We will not backfeed the lake. He spoke our language and his. I wanted to see his face. But here's the part I didn't see coming. The storm had more than rain to offer. It had timing. NOHSEP to Station 6, another voice cut in, rain static making a kind of percussion. Report of a stalled school bus under I-610 at West End. Water over the tire. Driver says kid's not aboard, but he's stuck. Do not send traffic east. We're barricading. Copy, I said, imagining that underpass, the way it drinks first and hardest. We'll keep flow and call when the canal stage drops a 10th. Andre, Malik again, now closer, like he'd leaned into his mic just for me. I'm walking into your control room. Permission to be at your shoulder? I turned, and there he was in the doorway, rain on his NOHSEP windbreaker, soft halo from the bug-killer light bluing his cheekbones. He was taller than the radio had built him and somehow shorter than my expectations had grown him. Black, early 30s, clean beard, baseball cap damp around the brim, a lanyard with a worn corner where a badge had kissed it 1,000 times. He looked at the panel, not at me, in the first second, which is how I knew I could like him. Then he looked at me, and I was gone a little. "You're Andre," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a reason to stay upright. "You're Malik," I said, and watched relief cross his face like clouds moving off the sun's face for a second. He exhaled a small laugh. His eyes did that quick scan triage people do when they count rooms, exits, and hearts. "You good?" he asked, casual. "Still here," I said, "because I'm trying on new answers this year instead of the ones that pretend I don't need anybody." "Right here," he said back, like a return he'd been practicing. The way he said it made right sound like home. We didn't have time to test metaphors. The pump room coughed the way metal does when a load shifts faster than it likes. "2 just dropped," I said, wiping my palm on my jeans as if that ever helped a watt meter. "Turbine 2 out. Protection tripped." "Bring B," he said, "not above me, not under me, beside me." "Split the bank again." I started diesel B and felt my skin make electricity a personality. The synchronizer blinked, flirted, committed. Pump 5 took more weight. The head at the outfall nudged the needle and then shrugged. The canal stage paused like it was listening. "Andre," the radio said, "now a choir. We've got rumors on next door that the city is opening gates to send water into the lake." "That's a no," I said, maybe sharper than the radio required. "Gates stay shut. We pump only. Put that in big letters. Do not open gate 4. The lake is higher." "We're not making backflow art," affirmed, Malik said. "I'll push it on EOC channels." He looked at me and, this is important, didn't smile. He kept his face neutral because neutral lands better than I told you so when people are wet. The floor radio crackled. "Public Works to Station 6. Harrison at Canal is ponding across 2 lanes. We're blocking. NOPD needs cones. I've got cones in the bay," I said. "My relief can watch the board for 5. "We'll go. We," he said, as though he hadn't come here wearing a vest that says he should stand behind 3 layers of plan. "You're inside my radius," I said. "You're mine for 5 minutes." He nodded, and we moved, down the stairs past the smell of old water and newer paint, out into the rain that had decided to audition for percussion. The neutral ground, the median the rest of the country calls something boring, was already decorated with cars whose owners had assumed tires or boats. We loaded the cones into the back of my unit and drove the 1 block that became 5 because hydroplaning is a script the city knows too well. At Harrison, water tried to remember it was a community. NOPD cruisers stood like rebukes. Officers moved like men who'd had to learn how to be patient twice. We set cones, pushed a sedan out of its bad decisions, waved people away with palms and a tone, and learned each other in the small talk of work. Malik's childhood in Gentilly, my own in a house on Orleans Avenue where my older brother taught me to label everything we loved on hurricane days. But the part I didn't see coming, I started, not meaning to narrate the night out loud, "is always the part you have to live in," he said, finishing a thought I didn't know I'd started. Lightning tried to make punctuation out of our sentences. Somewhere 3 blocks south, a transformer voiced its opinion. The wind turned oak leaves into choreography. I could see the canal line from here, the dark cut through neighborhoods that have had enough of cuts. "Andre, back inside," my station tech, Ramon, called over the handheld. Canal climbed .08 in the last 5. The band over us just went from yellow to orange. We jogged back through rain that wasn't kidding and took the stairs 2 at a time. The control room smelled like metal and old coffee and the kind of effort you can't buy. I slid into my chair like it owed me rent. Telemetry says outfall head is +0.7. Lake, +1.2. Gate 4 stays shut, I narrated on the open channel, because sometimes speaking the rule out loud keeps your hands honest. Diesel A at 75%, Diesel B at 60%. Pump 3 whines at 48 Hz, normal, Pump 5 singing steady. "Massage 12, Malik said, pointing, deft but not assuming. He meant the trend graph, a smoothing, so that minds that wanted to panic could instead trace a curve that told a story. I thumbed the control wheel and watched the jagged settle into a narrative that humans like. It helped more than I want to admit. NOHSEP to Station 6. West End Underpass is cleared of vehicles. Drivers out. Causeway approach ponding. An OPD requests 1 more pallet of sand at Navarre and Orleans. On it, Malik said into his shoulder mic, and I watched a guy who knows how to make a city move without making it angry. He nodded at me. You good? Still here, I said. Right here, he said back, his hand brushing the back of my chair in a way I decided not to overinterpret even as my entire spine registered it for later. Wait, don't miss this detail. A soft ping on the far end of the board, the kind of noise the manufacturer picked when they designed the alarm menu because they didn't want to scare anyone. Pump 5's bearing temperature ticked up 2 degrees. That should mean nothing. That can mean everything when the city's weight is on your metal. 5 is warming, I said. Give it a minute, Malik said gently. If it climbs 3 more, we'll feather and let 3 eat. I breathed. He watched the needle with me and said nothing else. The temp shivered, then settled. A child who'd thought about a tantrum and decided to nap instead. 5 is warming, I said. Give it a minute, Malik said gently. If it climbs 3 more, we'll feather and let 3 eat. I breathed. He watched the needle with me and said nothing else. The temp shivered, then settled. A child who'd thought about a tantrum and decided to nap instead. Public Works to Station 6. We've got trash rack choke at the bar screen on Harrison. We're pulling a mountain of bags. Copy, I said. We'll keep head on the station. Do not let anybody put hands below waist near the screen. That instruction is printed. People still need to hear it like a fresh sentence. By midnight, the bands had turned into freight trains. The city drew in on itself the way it does, the poised hush between Thunder's arguments. We ate saltines because everyone had forgotten to plan dinner and refused to name whose job that had been. Malik wrote 2 lines on a sticky note and pressed it to the corner of my panel where my eye would have to cross it to get to gate 4. Do not open. Looked at his handwriting and thought outrageously inappropriate thoughts about men who can print legibly under stress. Andre. He touched my shoulder again and I didn't flinch because he wasn't asking for me. He was offering me. I'm going to walk the screen at Station 4 on Orleans and check the small pumps. Text me if 2 sneezes or the canal sniffs crest. Still with me? I tested, tasting the words in his syntax. Right here, he said, and then he was gone out into the wet night with a man from Public Works who has a tattoo of a saxophone and a hat only his wife can love. But the truly shocking part waited until the city had almost convinced. Us, it was going to behave. EOC to NOHSEP field. Industrial Canal Sector Gate reports actuator fault. USACE is on scene. Do not assume IHNC Lake Pontchartrain surge barrier is closed. Expect back surge on outfalls east of Gentilly. The voice was calm and new and had been hired for that calm. Andre, Malik's voice, breath harder now, rain in his microphone. You're fine on 17th. Lake Pontchartrain has its own stories tonight. But here's the part where rumor makes my job harder than water. Somebody is saying, open the gates to drain faster. Do not. I won't, I said, and realized he didn't need the sentence. I did. I spun my chair back to Gate 4's wheel and sat on my hand like my granddad taught me to when I was 12 and kept touching the oven door to prove it was hot. Copy, he said. I like how you sit. I didn't turn around because if we started that, we might forget why we were hired. I watched a city hold instead. Rehook. It should have ended there, with pumps singing and gates shut and a lake glowering but obeying physics. The next test wore a baby cry and a wheelchair and a concrete ramp slicker, then memory. NOPD to NOHSEP. Claiborne underpass near Esplanade has a family stranded on the neutral ground, wheelchair and stroller. EMS is delayed. We need bodies with badges to make a path. On me, Malik said, and before the echo died he was in my door again, rain in his eyebrows. He didn't have to ask. I stood. Ramon can mind the board, I told him. If 2 coughs, he'll feather and call you. Gate 4 stays shut. Gate 4 stays shut, he echoed, and that last repetition did something to my bones I'm not ready to explain. We took the truck because after midnight in a storm, the city let some rules bend under kindness. Claiborne was the kind of theater you never want to sell tickets to. Water to mid-calf in the hollow. the overpass throwing back sound like a bathroom does, a minivan with its lights still on insisting it had been right, a man in a wheelchair with the posture of a person who'd learned how dignity holds when wheels don't, a woman with a baby on her hip making air with her voice because she knew better than to waste it on the sky. "We're here," Malik said, the two words that replace sorry when the night is already full. "We've got you. Andre, cones on the downstream side. I'm going to lay lines with tape. We'll make a corridor. We do this sometimes. Turn the city into a board game with rules it will obey. Blue tape stuck to wet concrete. Cones making a sentence. People finding out they like to be told where to put their feet when their feet have run out of ideas." Malik put his palm up the way he had in my control room, and people did what the palm asked. The wheelchair ramp had the texture of a bad promise. I crouched in the water and put my thigh where a wheel wanted to pretend to belong. "You ready?" I asked the man in the chair. He nodded, jaw tight enough to cut. "Left hand here, right on the rail. We take one piece at a time." "I hate this," he said, like my guy earlier in a different story. "It's a species of honesty that doesn't need fixing." "Me too," I said, because that's the only answer. "We're going to land you." We did. 2 on the frame, 1 on the rail, Malik counting. Not numbers, breaths. In, hold, out. He turned air into work again, and the work obeyed. The woman with the baby cried when she was on dry concrete and then apologized to the baby for making air into sound. The baby forgave her at once because babies are radicals. A NOPD officer touched his brim at Malik like he'd been taught the same ritual by a different city. "Still with me?" Malik asked, low in my ear. "Right here," I said, water crawling into my boot and deciding to make a home. We walked them up to the neutral ground where the water pretended it had never been. EMS arrived late by exactly as much as a life will let it be forgiven. We stood there under the bridge, rain scribbling its loud handwriting on the concrete, and he laughed once. That single exhale that keeps nights honest. "You print neat," I said, because I couldn't help myself and because the sticky note was still warm behind my eyes. "My mama taught me to write like I mean it," he said. "My daddy taught me to mean it. My mama taught me to sit on my hand if I thought it was smarter than me," I said. "My daddy taught me to listen to turbines like they were family stories." "We make a good bowl," he said, looking at the city like it could hear him. "We're the spoons," I said, and he barked a real laugh then, quick and surprised, and I wanted to hoard it. By the time we got back to Station 6, the board looked like the aftermath of a decision. Canal stage down 3 inches. Lake still had opinions, but the wind had turned polite. Diesel A and B hummed like kitchen appliances in a neighborhood where the lights stay on when somebody remembers to pay the bill. Ramon had written times on a legal pad that will one day make a nice court exhibit if anyone wants to pretend this was easy. "Lake at Plero.8, I read. "Outfall head, Bluzero.3. We'll hold another hour and then test a crack on Gate 4 if the seiche keeps falling." "Affirmed," Malik said. Hands on the back of my chair again in that way that would normally get a man yelled at in a control room, except he was a kind of medicine. "You good?" "Still here," I said, and then, because I wanted to be brave for once without drama, "Don't leave." He didn't look at me for a beat, which is how I knew he understood the weight of what I'd asked. Then he said, "Right here," softer than any radio gets to be, and he set his palm on the metal beside my hand. "Not on me. Not yet. Not until the city was done asking for both of us. Wait, don't miss this last piece." 0240, the band thinned. The lake's shoulder dropped. Malik and I ran the test we had been telling rumors to fear all night. I cracked Gate 4 1 inch with his eyes on the gauge, my fingers on the wheel, Ramon's hand on the stop because love is redundancies. No backflow. We kept it there like a secret for 5 minutes, then eased it shut because the city was already forgiving us for even thinking about it. We held the pumps, watched the canal stage slide like a kid on the levee, and let the room decide to be a room again. By dawn, the sky was the color of old spoonbacks and the rain had turned to a kind of confession. Public Works posted a photo of a trash rack that looked like Mardi Gras got dunked. The city's feed thanked Station 6 and the other stations that had earned the right to sleep. NOHSEP posted a map with little blue dots where the water had chosen to linger and added the sentence I wanted the night to hear. We keep the gates. You kept the lane. We can't have privacy in a place built for parades, but we found something close. In the little jut of the station's seawall, under the catwalk where the rain becomes a sheet and a secret, he set his forehead to mine for one beat. PG-13, consent, baptism. The bug killer hummed. The pumps kept the city from arguing with itself. A pelican, ridiculous as any saint, glided past the outfall and made a miracle look like a shrug. He stepped back first because dispatchers always do. We didn't swap numbers like we were pretending to be a movie. We wrote a rule like men with radios and jobs. When NWS paints the polygon purple and the city remembers the sound of bowls, he texts here. When SWBNO says bring diesels, I text on deck. He keeps a spare spacer in our first aid kit with a note that reads, for the kid who names it, because every city has kids like that. I keep a Sharpie in his go bag because labels are love after midnight. A week later, a pop-up thunderstorm turned Carrollton into an argument and we practiced again. Cones, tape, breaths, gates. 2 weeks later, a rumor about boil water tried to start a fight and we insulted it with facts. Every time he said do not into a room that wanted drama, my hands got steadier. Every time I said hold into a board that wanted to move, his eyes got softer. We learned the city's yes together, quietly. On a Sunday that looked like a postcard, we sat on the river wall near Crescent Park and watched a container ship move like an apartment complex that had learned manners. He wore a hat that made his head look like a decision I would keep making. I touched the brim and he let me. We practiced the one beat again. No cameras, no sirens, just barges, gulls, and the part of the air that never quite gives up its salt. People think our work is noise and metal. It is. It's also names and rules, and the way do not can be a kind of love if you say it on time. Sometimes the safest place in New Orleans isn't behind a levee or under a surge gate. Sometimes it's the 1 inch between two foreheads under a catwalk while the city forgives itself for living below sea level. Sometimes it's a radio that says your name like a handrail and do not like a promise. Sometimes it's Gate 4 staying shut because Lake Me 1.2, the next storm, will come. It always does. The lake will get its shoulders up. The underpasses will try to audition for unswimmable. Somebody will think their car can float. Somebody will name their inhaler something brave. We will pump what falls. We will close what needs closing. We will open when physics says okay and not a second before. He'll keep rooms from breaking. I'll keep water from pretending it's in charge. He'll ask, still with me? And I'll say, right here. We'll hold the night where it needs holding. High ground. Low voices, stayed.